In this part of the course, we are dealing with the problem of protection and restoration of nature. It is quite interesting problem because we may think that we can fix the problems like by just restoring or recreating natural entities. There might be various issues related to it and various arguments. So, in environmental philosophy, there has been a very interesting discussion regarding these topics. So, uh, we can see, for instance, very many interesting authors presenting ideas about the preservation. For instance, the proponent of preservation was John Moore, who is one of the founders of Sierra Club and is uh, associated with the preservationist ideal uh, so which promotes kind of like intrinsic value of wilderness. He believes that untouched nature has spiritual and moral significance and should be protected from human interference. For instance, in his book in uh, beginning of 20th century national parks, uh, he presents these ideas. For instance, his influence was central to the establishment of the US national parks, like, for instance, Yosemite. Uh, on the other hand, we can mention also uh, Gifford Pinchot, who is also kind of proponent of the value of wilderness, but in contrast, Pinchot, the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service, promoted a utilitarian model of conservation focused on sustainable resource use. For him, forests and landscapes were valuable primarily for their utility to humans. So the value of wilderness, so there was like kind of value of wilderness, but it was more like instrumental value for humans. He was kind of advocating the greatest good for the greatest number for the longest time. His book, his text, The Fight for Conservation from 1910, is kind of describing these things. Uh, then there is contribution from William Cronon, who was critique of wilderness. In his essay The Trouble with Wilderness in 1995, he presented the challenges, the romanticization of wilderness as untouched by humans, are presenting, and he critiques how wilderness is a cultural construct that often excludes indigenous people whose lands were appropriated under the guise of conservation. This perspective emphasized that what is considered natural often involves erasing human histories and contributions to ecosystem. So he is pointing out really this kind of problem of this kind of different cultures, and it is we can see this problem or this kind of overlap with also with the issue of environmental injustice and this kind of problem of multicultural perspective or the need for kind of multicultural perspective and the point of view from the point of different stakeholders. Uh, Similarly, there is also this issue of indigenous displacement. For instance, protected areas like Yellowstones and Yosemite were created through the forced removal of indigenous people. And such examples then highlight how these conservation efforts, especially in their early forms, were often aligned with colonial agendas. So it was really often kind of then uh, it was under the name of protecting nature, but at the same time there were kind of problems with the rights of people. So, for instance, they were like a sidelining indigenous knowledge system and ethical relationships with the land. We can uh, read about that, for instance, in the text "Dispossessing the Wilderness" from 1999. So there is also like this question whether we really can kind of restore the nature, because the restoration ecology raises complex ethical questions about authenticity, intention, and the limit of human control. Restoration is not just a scientific endeavor but also a deeply philosophical problem, and there were many like philosophical discussions or philosophical texts related to the problem of nature restoration. Among the authors we can mention, for instance, Eliot or Katz or Andrew Light or Helena Sipi, also dealing with the problem of naturalness. So, for instance, Andrew Light distinguished between ecological and cultural restoration. He argues that restoration projects should aim not just to recreate ecosystems but also to renew ethical relationships between humans and the environment. He sees restorations as an opportunity to foster community care and ecological responsibility. So you can read more about his ideas is in his text, for instance, in ecological restoration and the culture of nature. Another famous author dealing with this problem of restoration is Robert Eliot, who is now emeritus professor, and he is kind of presenting this idea of faking nature. So he criticized this ecological restoration as creating morally and aesthetically inferior fakes. So even if a restored, for instance, wetland functions similarly to the original, its moral value is diminished due to its artificial origin. And he's making kind of analogy between this faking nature and faking art, or faking like kind of masterpieces, like when you can imagine like when you see a fake kind of picture or fake painting of some famous author. It can look the same if the kind of like the person who is faking it is making very good job, but still it is like just a fake, or many other examples you can think of like where you came across fakes and it is not what it should be. So this is according to him also kind of like argument against faking nature. Another author is Eric Katz. He also shares this Eliot skepticism and is arguing that restoration involves a form of technological domination over nature. His idea is kind of this like big lie. He calls the idea that we can heal nature through restoration a big lie. So It's because it obscures the loss of original nature and implies human mastery. So it is again similar to Eliot's approach, where we are seeing uh, the restoration of nature as kind of faking or lying and not fulfilling the full goal of protection of nature. Also, Helena Sipis, Finnish author, environmental ethicist, she is dealing with the concept of naturalness, and in her works of dimensions of naturalness, she's also dealing with this restoration uh, that she's claiming that the restoration can retain ethical value if it maintains ecological processes and continuity, even if it does not fully replicate historical conditions. So there can be some practical examples, like for instance, dam removal, like in America, in the United States, Elba River. Uh, there were removed dams, which allowed salmon to return, showing how restoration can revive ecological functions and cultural practices. Uh, Another example can be rewilding. For instance, in Netherlands, Oostvaarder der Plassen. This involves reintroducing large herbivores to mimic ancient ecosystems. While innovative, it has faced criticism for causing animal suffering and ignoring historical baselines. Then another example can be afforestation, like another kind of way how to restore forests. Uh, it can be, let's say, China's Grain for Green program. It's mass tree planting, which helps soil stability, but raises concerns about biodiversity loss when monocultures are planted. Because this, when you kind of plant a new forest, you have to be like really careful with this kind of management of different trees and so on, because in a natural forest we naturally have a variety of plants and variety of course of microorganism, variety of animals. And in this kind of human-made forest, when it's not well made, it's really this problem of this biodiversity. It can be really like a monoculture, and this is not helping anything. It can lead to even worse impact on the environment, like the kind of instability of the trees and so on. So, regarding those ethical implications, restoration can imply that nature is a human managed system, potentially reducing respect for wild processes. Protection, while aiming to keep ecosystems intact, can exclude human communities and freeze landscapes in time. Philosophers like, for instance, Holmes Rollstone III warn against the arrogance of assuming we can engineer ecosystem like humans. So, for instance, his book Environmental Ethics. Uh, for instance, Michael Rosenzweig was dealing with the problem of Laotian ecology, he proposes a third path rather than choosing between human use and untouched wilderness. We should find ways to share ecosystems with nature. So it was his text, Win Win Ecology. And then can be there like a kind of way to a hybrid ethic. Increasingly, scholars argued for combining restoration with protection. Hybrid approaches acknowledge the inevitability inevitability of human influence in the Anthropocene and seek to develop ethical participatory strategies that recognize both ecological and cultural dimensions. So this can be really interesting topic for thinking about how to protect the nature or whether to choose really this restoration or conservation because really it is very difficult and to make that restoration really working well, and you have to keep in mind like all the variables that are in natural ecosystems in order to not cause even worse damage.